Early on December 14, 2005, disaster struck in Missouri's Ozark Mountains. The upper reservoir of the Taum Sauk pumped storage plant suddenly collapsed, releasing 1 billion gallons of water, enough to fill 1,500 Olympic swimming pools, down the mountainside in just 25 minutes. The raging floodwaters swept away everything in their path, including trees, hiking trails, and even a park ranger's home. Miraculously, the sleeping family inside survived, but the devastation left permanent scars on the landscape that remain visible today. This wasn't a natural disaster. Every drop of that destructive floodwater had been pumped up the mountain by humans. The Taum Sauk facility, built between 1960 and 1962, was designed as a giant water battery to store electricity. At night, when power demand was low, it pumped water uphill to its man-made reservoir. During peak daytime hours, the water flowed back down through turbines to generate electricity. The plant was an engineering marvel of its time, the largest pumped storage facility in North America when completed. It featured cutting-edge technology, including the ability to be controlled remotely from over 100 miles away. But serious design flaws made disaster inevitable. Unlike most hydro plants that use natural valleys, Taum Sauk's upper reservoir was completely artificial, a circular concrete-lined pool built atop the mountain. The dam walls consisted mainly of loose rockfill, which began sinking unevenly over time. Some sections settled nearly 2 feet lower than others, weakening the structure. The warning signs were ignored. In September 2005, an operator warned managers that water overflowing the dam could cause catastrophic failure. Just 2 months before the collapse, divers found the water level sensors had come loose, giving false readings. Despite these red flags, no repairs were made. At 5:09 a.m. on that December morning, water began spilling over the dam's northwest edge. Within minutes, the force of the water eroded the unstable rockfill embankment. By 5:34 a.m., a 650-foot section collapsed completely, unleashing the entire reservoir's contents in a devastating torrent. The flood scoured 280 acres of Johnson's shut-in state park down to bare rock, causing $1 billion in damage. Investigations revealed multiple failures: poor original construction on unstable soil, faulty sensor installation in 2004, ignored warnings from staff, lack of emergency spillways. The rebuilding process took 5 years and cost $500 million. Engineers replaced the failed rockfill dam with stronger roller-compacted concrete and added proper spillways. The plant reopened in 2010, now with redundant safety systems. Today, pumped storage remains crucial for renewable energy, with modern plants learning from Taum Sauk's mistakes. New projects in Michigan and China incorporate better designs and multiple backup systems. Some companies are even experimenting with alternatives to water, using dense mineral slurries that could make future facilities safer and more efficient. But Taum Sauk wasn't the only time human ambition, and a few ignored warnings, led to catastrophe. Let's look at more real-world disasters where a single oversight led to unimaginable consequences. The oil rig that couldn't be stopped. The Deepwater Horizon disaster began as just another day on the massive offshore drilling rig in the Gulf of Mexico. But on April 20, 2010, a series of preventable mistakes turned routine operations into one of history's worst environmental catastrophes. Workers had noticed warning signs for weeks: strange pressure readings, equipment malfunctions, and concerning test results. Just hours before the explosion, a crucial safety test failed spectacularly, showing dangerous pressure building in the well. Instead of stopping work, supervisors dismissed it as a false reading and pushed forward. At 9:45 p.m., the first explosion rocked the rig. Methane gas, shooting up from the failed wellhead, ignited into a fireball visible from space. 11 workers never made it off the platform that night. As the rig burned and sank, it unleashed an unstoppable torrent of crude oil from the broken wellhead nearly a mile underwater. For 87 agonizing days, the world watched helplessly as 210 million gallons of oil poured into the Gulf, enough to fill over 300 Olympic-sized swimming pools. The investigation revealed shocking negligence. BP had chosen cheaper, weaker cement to seal the well, saving just $500,000 on a multi-billion-dollar project. Critical safety systems had been disabled or malfunctioned, including the massive blowout preventer that was supposed to be the last line of defense. Most disturbingly, Workers testified that multiple warnings had been ignored in the rush to complete the overdue project. Internal emails showed engineers had called the well a nightmare with lots of risk weeks before the disaster. The aftermath was devastating. Oil coated 1,300 miles of coastline from Texas to Florida, killing wildlife and crippling the fishing industry. BP ultimately paid $65 billion in fines and cleanup costs, the most expensive corporate mistake in history. But perhaps the most haunting question remains. With so many warnings and so many safety systems available, how could so many people have made so many bad decisions that led to this entirely preventable tragedy? Boston's Sweetest disaster turned deadly. It sounds like something out of a cartoon, a flood of molasses tearing through a major city. But what happened in Boston on January 15, 1919 was deadly, real, and utterly bizarre. At the heart of it was a massive steel tank, 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide, filled to the brim with over 2 million gallons of thick, sticky molasses. It belonged to the Purity Distilling Company and sat in Boston's North End, a busy working-class neighborhood. People lived nearby. Children played in its shadow. Then, without warning, it exploded. Witnesses described a low rumble, like a train. The tank ruptured violently, and a dark wave of molasses burst into the streets, 25 feet high, traveling at 35 miles per hour. It crushed buildings, smashed steel girders, knocked a firehouse off its foundation, and swept people and horses away like toys. There was no chance to run. The sticky flood was so dense and fast that it literally suffocated victims, trapping them where they stood. Many were found with no injuries, just drowned in syrup. Even more disturbing? In the cold January air, the molasses quickly hardened, turning rescue efforts into a nightmare. First responders had to wade through a sugary sludge. 21 people died, and over 150 were injured. For weeks afterward, the city reeked of molasses. Rescue workers reported finding shoe soles, hats, and even whole bodies buried in the hardening goo. And even decades later, locals claimed you could still smell it on hot summer days. As absurd as it sounds, this sweet disaster was no joke. It raised serious questions about industrial safety and led to new regulations for building inspections and material storage. A deadly flood, no rain, no river, just molasses. A cloud of poison rolled downhill. On the night of December 2nd, 1984, the city of Bhopal went to sleep like any other. But by sunrise, it had turned into a city of the dead. At the heart of it was a pesticide plant owned by Union Carbide. Inside its tanks was a highly toxic chemical called methyl isocyanate, or MIC. That night, a storage tank leaked. No one noticed at first. No alarm was sounded. No warning sirens were activated. The gas was invisible. But the death it carried was not. A dense, toxic cloud crept silently out of the factory and rolled downhill into the city. People woke up choking, eyes burning. Some tried to run. Others collapsed mid-step. The gas attacked the lungs first, causing vomiting, internal bleeding, and death within minutes. Entire families died in their sleep. Children were found clutched in their parents' arms, both gone. By morning, thousands were dead. The true toll remains debated, but estimates range from 3,000 to over 15,000 fatalities, with hundreds of thousands more suffering long-term effects: blindness, cancer, birth defects, and chronic illness. Some victims are still suffering today, decades later. What made it worse? There was no emergency plan, no proper safety systems, and the plant had been cutting corners, ignoring maintenance warnings, switching off safety devices, and storing more MIC than it was ever designed to handle. And yet, justice never truly came. The company responsible fled, executives walked free, and compensation was minimal. Survivors were left with shattered lives and no answers. It wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't an accident. It was a man-made nightmare and one of the deadliest industrial tragedies in human history. The sky that caught fire. It started with a fire, a small plume of smoke rising from a warehouse at the port of Beirut, barely noticed by most people. But within minutes the smoke thickened. Flames burst upward, crowds gathered, phones came out, people filmed, and then the sky exploded. On August 4, 2020, the Lebanese capital was rocked by one of the most powerful non-nuclear explosions ever recorded. The shockwave shattered windows miles away, flipped cars, leveled entire buildings, and was heard over 150 miles from ground zero. Caught on hundreds of phones and security cameras, the blast created a rising, mushroom-shaped cloud that looked straight out of a war zone. In just seconds, 218 people were killed, more than 7,000 injured, and over 300,000 left homeless. But the true horror was what caused it. 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, a highly explosive chemical used in fertilizers and bombs, had been improperly stored in a warehouse for 6 years, right next to fireworks, oil drums, and a densely populated city. Officials knew. Letters had been sent. Warnings were issued. Nothing was done. No safety. No inspection. Just a deadly stockpile, left to rot, until a small spark turned it into a catastrophe. The explosion was so powerful, it registered as a 3.3 magnitude earthquake. A city that had already suffered from economic collapse and political instability was now left in ruins because of corruption, neglect, and silence. This wasn't just a blast. It was a bomb hidden in plain sight, and when it went off, the sky caught fire. The O-ring that doomed 7 astronauts. It was supposed to be a historic day. On January 28, 1986, millions of Americans tuned in to watch the Space Shuttle Challenger launch into space. Among the crew was Krista McAuliffe, a schoolteacher set to become the first civilian teacher in orbit, a symbol of hope, progress, and inspiration. But 73 seconds after liftoff, the shuttle disintegrated in the sky. 7 astronauts died live on national television. Families watched from the ground. Students watched from classrooms. The world froze in horror. The cause? Something so small, so seemingly insignificant. It sounds like fiction. A rubber O-ring, that's right. A small sealing ring inside the shuttle's right booster failed in the cold. The temperature that morning was unusually low, and engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company responsible for the booster, knew the O-rings might not hold in freezing weather. They warned NASA, repeatedly. Internal memos, emergency meetings, late-night phone calls. Engineers begged for the launch to be delayed. They even predicted the exact failure. Gas leaking from the booster, burning through the side and destroying the fuel tank. They were overruled. NASA, under pressure to maintain a flawless public image and avoid further delays, pushed forward anyway. Public relations came first. Safety came second. The twist? There were no backup systems for the O-rings. No plan B. If they failed, it was over. And fail, they did. The result was a fiery explosion that tore Challenger apart mid-air. Debris rained down over the Atlantic. For weeks, recovery teams searched the ocean floor for wreckage and for remains. Years later, the official investigation confirmed it. The O-rings hardened in the cold, failed to seal properly, and allowed superheated gases to escape, triggering the catastrophe. But the real mystery remains. Did NASA truly not understand the risk? Or did they just choose to ignore it? To this day, the Challenger disaster serves as a haunting reminder. Sometimes it's not the machines that fail. It's the people in charge. The shortcut that shattered lives. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. On July 17, 1981, the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Kansas City was hosting a popular Friday night dance event. The lobby buzzed with music, laughter, and over 1,600 people enjoying the spectacle of the hotel's grand atrium, featuring suspended skywalks hovering above the ground floor. Then, disaster struck in a single instant. 2 walkways, one on the second floor, another directly above it on the fourth, collapsed without warning, sending over 60 tons of steel and concrete crashing down onto the crowd below. The result? 114 people dead, over 200 injured. It became one of the deadliest structural failures in US history. But what caused a seemingly solid structure to give way so catastrophically? A last-minute design change. Originally, the 2 walkways were meant to be hung by continuous steel rods running through both levels, distributing the weight evenly. But a contractor proposed a quicker alternative, using 2 separate rods, one set for each walkway. It seemed minor, It wasn't. That single change doubled the load on the fourth-floor walkway's connectors, turning a floating piece of architecture into a loaded gun. And here's the twist. The revised design was approved, stamped, filed, no calculations were updated, no one double-checked the math. Investigations revealed that neither the engineering firm nor the fabricators properly reviewed how the change would affect structural integrity. The critical connection point, where the rods met the beams, was never meant to bear that much weight. Even more chilling? There were rumors that safety inspections were rushed or ignored altogether, that shortcuts were taken to meet deadlines and impress clients. Did someone sign off on a known flaw just to stay on schedule? Did engineers fake compliance to avoid delays? We may never know for sure. What's certain is this: in less than 10 seconds, a ballroom became a graveyard. Rescue workers described scenes of horror. People pinned between concrete slabs, the sound of moaning under twisted metal, shoes and jewelry embedded into the debris. The Hyatt Walkway collapse wasn't caused by a storm, an earthquake, or an act of terrorism. It was caused by paperwork, a design tweak, a missing second look, and it cost 114 lives. A preventable tragedy. On April 23, 2013, workers at Bangladesh's Rana Plaza garment factory noticed something terrifying. Massive cracks had appeared throughout the building overnight. When engineers inspected the structure, their conclusion was unequivocal. The building was unsafe and needed immediate evacuation. Yet the next morning, factory managers forced over 3,000 workers back inside, threatening to withhold their meager wages if they refused. Just hours later, the entire 8-story complex collapsed into a pile of concrete and twisted metal, killing 1,134 people in one of the worst industrial disasters in modern history. The tragedy revealed a shocking pattern of negligence and greed. The building's owner, Sohail Rana, had illegally added 4 extra floors to the original structure without proper permits or engineering oversight. These additional floors, packed with heavy industrial equipment, were built with substandard materials and inadequate supports. Even more disturbingly, the upper floors were constructed without proper foundations, essentially making the building a ticking time bomb. Local authorities had turned a blind eye to these violations, allegedly in exchange for bribes and political favors. Behind this preventable disaster lay the brutal economics of fast fashion. Rana Plaza housed factories producing clothing for major Western brands like Benetton, Walmart, and Primark. Under pressure to meet tight deadlines and low price points, factory owners routinely cut corners on safety. Workers, mostly young women earning just $38 per month, had no power to protest the dangerous conditions. Even when the building's structural flaws became impossible to ignore, profit margins were prioritized over human lives. In the aftermath, the international community demanded change. The Bangladesh Accord on Fire and Building Safety was established, with over 200 global brands signing binding agreements to improve factory conditions. While the owner was sentenced to life in prison, many victims' families received minimal compensation. Today, Rana Plaza stands as a grim reminder of what happens when corporate greed goes unchecked and worker safety becomes an afterthought in the global supply chain. The town that burned forever. It started with a simple cleanup. In May 1962, workers in the small coal mining town of Centralia, Pennsylvania, lit a fire in a landfill to burn off trash. Harmless enough, except that the landfill sat on top of an old abandoned coal mine. The fire slipped through a hidden crack, and it never stopped burning. What no one realized at first was that the flames had ignited a massive underground coal seam, a labyrinth of tunnels filled with fuel that stretched beneath the entire town. As the fire crept deeper, it started releasing toxic gases, buckling roads, and opening yawning sinkholes that spewed smoke. One day in 1981, a 12-year-old boy fell into a fissure that suddenly opened in his backyard, a hole more than 100 feet deep, belching hot steam. He survived, but it was clear. Centralia was no longer safe. You'd think that would be the point where officials took drastic action. But strangely, they didn't. For years, local and state authorities argued, downplayed the danger, and refused to spend the money to extinguish the blaze. Experts warned that putting out the fire would be difficult, but not impossible. Still, the effort was half-hearted at best. By the time the government stepped in, it was too late. The fire had already spread too far. Entire blocks were abandoned. Residents were forced to relocate. Homes were demolished. Streets vanished beneath the smoke. By the 2000s, almost everyone was gone, except for a few holdouts. Today, the once bustling town of Centralia is a ghost town. The ground still smokes. The air still smells of sulfur. The fire still burns, invisible and unstoppable, and experts say it could keep going for another 250 years. So the question lingers, why didn't they stop it when they had the chance? And who made the call to let a whole town vanish, silently, from beneath? The catastrophe that never happened. Most of the events in this list caused destruction on a massive scale. Towns flooded, mountains crumbled, rivers boiled. But this one is different, because it's about a disaster that almost happened, one that would have changed the world forever. And the only reason it didn't? One man refused to press a button. It was the middle of the Cold War. Tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were at a breaking point. Both nations had enough nuclear weapons to wipe out the planet many times over, and they were on hair-trigger alert. On September 26, 1983, just past midnight, a warning flashed across the Soviet early warning system. Missile launch detected. Incoming nuclear strike from the United States. 1 missile, then 2, then 5. Then the system screamed, "Full-scale nuclear attack underway." Sitting at the control panel that night was Stanislav Petrov, a 44-year-old duty officer. His job was terrifyingly simple. If the computers confirmed an American attack, he had to report it immediately. That report would trigger a retaliatory strike by the Soviet Union, likely sparking World War III. But something didn't sit right with him. The computers were saying the US had launched nuclear missiles, but radar stations weren't picking up anything. The number of missiles, just a handful, seemed off. If the US were really attacking, wouldn't they fire everything they had? Petrov's orders were clear. Trust the system, not your instincts. But he did the unthinkable. He disobeyed. Petrov reported it as a false alarm, choosing not to escalate. He told his superiors it was a computer glitch and chose to wait. He was right. There were no missiles. It was later discovered that a rare alignment of sunlight on high-altitude clouds had confused the Soviet satellites. So as you step away from this video, ask yourself, how many disasters have we survived without even knowing? And how many more are just one bad decision away? Because sometimes the scariest disasters are the ones that almost happened